funny having a Dharma text on a tablet. I feel like we should be flipping a page. So we've entered into the 7-point mind training, and we are in our second point still. And the second point is really the main practice. It's cultivating ultimate bodhicitta. It's asking us to peer right into the nature of reality itself. And so we've taken some time to kind of put our toe in the water gently and become aware of how things might actually exist as opposed to how they appear to exist. And so there's always a disclaimer when we start. Things exist. I exist, you exist, we exist. Having said that, we don't exactly exist the way we perceive ourselves or how we perceive others. And this is the crux to the whole problem. We reify things as they appear. They seem independent, we make them real, and then the trouble begins. The ground from which anger, resentment, jealousy, frustration, comparisons, insecurities, fears, temporary joys, grasping, attachments, desires, all arising in dependence upon something that appears to be real in a particular way that doesn't actually exist in that way. And so the working hypothesis is that if we actually saw how we and things actually exist, those misperceptions and mental afflictions cannot arise. And so this main part of this practice, we've already gotten to the point where we've kind of realized that, there's a lot of unnecessary suffering and mental afflictions that arise. We get worked up a lot over things that don't seem to last or don't seem to have the impact that we may think they have at the time. And it's easy to fall into that, and it's pretty easy to identify some of the outwardly very clear examples. I like to use just the one where we just get really frustrated when we're in a car and we're late, we're in a hurry, and we're in traffic. Because I think we can relate to that. By the way, I just laugh when I think I'm in traffic in Carbondale. I'm from LA, and I pulled out onto the highway to take Dawson to school in the morning. I thought, wow, now there's like 5 cars. You have to wait, and it's funny how we can get accustomed to that you shouldn't have to wait, and that's a lot of traffic. 5 cars, really, it's going to take me a minute. When I'm in LA, 5 cars is nothing. But here, that's in a row, 5 cars. It was traffic. So here's this label of traffic. And then if I'm late or if I'm frustrated or I'm caught in traffic, I can be pretty worked up, frustrated, angry, upset, stressed, and I'm simply in my car. And there's nothing really wrong, right? And my emotions are up here, but nothing actually physically is going on. So where's the stress and worry and fear? It's in my mind. Well, we can take that same type of example and put it into our best friend who didn't do what we expect them to do. And we're upset and we're frustrated, we're angry. We can get worked up over all types of things where we can't really identify any physical thing going on causing any discomfort other than how I perceive things ought to be. And if I looked at it a little bit differently, that suffering would fall away, right? So instead of the great example I love to use is, instead of being in traffic, if I think I am traffic, that's a very different shift. And it's also true, right? So we've kind of unpacked this. And so this, as we go in here, we start to see, well, if simple things like that, like why would I get angry at a family member who I love? Why would I get angry at a family member that I love? And we can, right? We've been angry at family members we love. We get pretty worked up over something that happened in a moment. And then the next day, we have regret, or we try to heal what happened, and I'm sorry about what happened. Well, where'd all that come from? It came from really latching on to a world that exists in a particular way, and really identifying very strongly with the feelings that arose based on something that seemed to be very real in a very particular way. But when we look at it, it doesn't really exist that way. And if we actually get that, then there's no basis for these mentally afflicted states to arise. And so that's where he's at us look at. He says, okay, well, now that we're ready, we've kind of identified, wow, my mind tells a lot of stories, and that there's mental and emotional suffering's in my mind. It's not out there. Well, how do things exist? How do things exist? And so we looked at the pith instructions here was consider the world as dreamlike. And that was our last, we had 2 sessions on that, 2 sessions. And what that really is asking us to consider is that the world that we perceive is not this very objective, solid, real experience in the way that it appears. Like a dream. A dream appears very real when we're having it, and then we wake up and we go, wow, that was just a dream. But today is Wednesday. Wednesday is not a dream. Right? Wednesday is very clear, and I'll tell you what Wednesday was like. But my Wednesday is going to be different than your Wednesday. And my whole experience of Wednesday can be very different if I look at it through a different lens. So this Wednesday is also going to be very dreamlike, because as I experience you, events, this room, things that happen, they're all dependent arisings. Everything that we experience is a dependent arising. It's not an objective, intrinsically real, solid thing out there. Everything is dependently arising. And so we unpack that for two sessions. Seeing how things arise, we use metaphors of the tree, of how the seed gives rise to a tree. It needs soil, it needs water, and so forth. It comes and it goes, but fundamentally, though, the tree doesn't exist anywhere. But where? Where's the tree? Right, my mind. Tree's a concept. There's something out there, some phenomena that's solid that I can hit my hand against. I can knock on wood. But wood is a concept. Wood's a mental construct in my mind. That's not wood. I label it wood, and it's a valid designation that we can call wood. We all agree that it's wood. Yeah, it's wood. But wood's an idea that we're all agreeing upon, and that's in my mind. That's a construct. And it's dependently arising as wood or as a table. Right now it's an altar. When it was purchased, it was a fold-up desk. It's pretty cool. The sides fold in, and the little thing folds, it's flat. And then you can pop it out. Has a little slidey thing even. It was a desk. Now it's an altar. And it fundamentally, physically hasn't changed. But now it's an altar. It used to be a desk. Fold-up desk. So you don't want to pick it up from the top. Not fun. So as we label something, we call it an altar. And then if I think of it as an altar, well, now it's a very sacred thing. And if you're a Tibetan, you don't want to mess with an altar. You'll notice that the water offerings are all put there very nicely, very nicely. They're evenly spaced. Of course, the incense is drooped into that water, making its own offering there. Must have been thirsty. And so even as, if something were to, be put on there inappropriate, then it can be this big thing that we're up against. And, altars are kept nicely. There's a kata that's offered. Water offerings have been made. There's light offering. There's smells. It's a very special thing. But is that intrinsically special? No. It's a dependent arising. It's dependent upon me actually seeing it as an altar, recognizing the Buddha, recognizing now when I look at 7 water offerings, well, I'm seeing someone that took time and energy in offering virtue as they poured the water, filling these incredibly, beautiful little bowls, offering all of the virtue to the benefit of all beings. And I know that that's what was done when they were filled up and they went from left to right and they're mindful and thoughtful. The light was offered and it was done very nicely. So a very different energy than if someone else came in here, kid comes in, wow, it looks pretty cool, but they have a different experience of this than I do. And then if you were to do something like this, there's some people that can get pretty worked up over that.
It looks the same from my perspective.
Ah! I don't want to get struck down there. So, but we can see how then something very sacred, somebody comes in and kicks down something you feel is very sacred, we could get pretty upset, right? They disrespected something I believe very dearly in. But is that inherent in any of this? No, it's dependent upon my view of this and my belief system of this and what I value. And somebody else who doesn't know anything about this, or someone who even has a different belief system who thinks this is harmful, they would love to tear that down. When we host His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it's interesting that here's the embodiment of compassion. And the first job I had as a monk was to help host His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. It's a good gig. Lowly little monk like me. But I'm going to tell you, it almost destroyed my whole sort of path. There's a lot of karma that comes with something like that. And what happens is when somebody has a view as something being very real, like wanting to be by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, they're pushing people out of the way to get closer. People are, the worst sides of themselves show up. And they can be people that you've known for a long time. They can be people who are ordained. They can be people that have the best of virtue in their hearts. And then you can watch all that go out the window as they claw over other people so that they can get a blessing on being compassionate. And I think we miss the point, right? I think we miss the point. Is it more important to be close to His Holiness, or is it more important to embody the teachings of compassion He would like you to have? And I think the latter is what's important. And that's a very vivid example of how, even with our best of intentions, we can get caught up in a mind that is absolutely contrary to even what I believe, and can be swept into this delusional way of being and just be convinced that, wow, if the Dalai Lama touches me, that'll be remarkable. And His Holiness will say, touching you is not remarkable. You changing your mind, that will be remarkable. That will be remarkable. So if we can identify that these problems exist, we can start to poke, well, where's that come from, and how true is that? Why would I yell at someone I love? Why would I push someone I care for aside so I can be closer to someone who's supposed to teach me about being kind to others? How's that work? Because it happens. It happens all the time. Where does our attachment arise when, oh, we have an opportunity for this, and I jump up, and my best self does not arise because I'm hoping somebody else doesn't step up? How many times do I, go into a room and think, well, I'd like somebody else to have the nice chair. Or when I pull into a parking lot, I'll park a little further away so someone else can get a little closer. Get on a plane and just think, I don't need an upgrade. I'm a little guy. Let somebody else have a nice seat. Fine. Does that arise naturally? Or does sometimes a little impulse go, oh, cool, I got an upgrade, maybe. Let me work for that. Let me make sure I get up there and ask that. Because, if you don't ask, you don't get. Closed mouth doesn't get fed. And now there's an energy around that. Now there's a tension. Now, boy, I really hope I get that seat. I want some leg room. Why not me? Now this tension. And this is all arising in dependence upon something seeming very real and very clear. And that my life would be so much better if only. If only. And actually what I'm creating is suffering. I'm creating a lot of suffering. So it's this trap that this mind, misperceiving reality, strives to find some happiness, avoid suffering, and it actually just creates more suffering. And so if we start to understand that things and events and how we're perceiving them is a dependent arising, and it shifts and it's dependent upon even my perception of how it arises, and that how I'm even perceiving it has a lot to do with how I used to live my life, which plants the seeds to what gives rise now. When I start to poke at it and I go, well, does anything really exist the way I see it? Or are things subjective? Am I experiencing in a very subjective way? And I think that's an entry point. The teachings go much more profoundly into that point that everything that arises is a dependent arising, dependent upon parts, my perception of them, etc. So we unpack that. I don't want to go too deep in that because we're going deep into another one pretty quick here. But we want to understand that how I label anything, if I see it as dreamlike, what I'm seeing is that it's not intrinsically real the way I'm seeing it. Right? So whatever story I tell you about today, will that be the whole story? No way. No way. Good day, bad day, we covered all that. In a good day, there's a lot of terrible things that happen. In a bad day, a lot of good things happen. Whether I got enough sleep last night is going to have a lot of impact on today. And I certainly didn't experience all of today. And then if I thought I had a terrible day, what if I had a terrible day? It was a terrible day. Okay, terrible day. It's awful. And then somebody says, hey, you know what? You got this check in the mail yesterday. It's a couple $1,000. Just came in the mail. Now my terrible day yesterday, now is it still a terrible day? It was a terrible day, but I got a check yesterday. I didn't know about the check, but now I got it. Everything just shifts. Everything just shifts with a new dependent arising, a new thing I'm paying attention to, a new thing that I'm seeing in a different light. It's all constantly shifting, and it's dependent upon other people, places, things, events, and I'm always just getting a glimpse into that day, that event, what's happening. But I tend to make it very real, very firm, and I'll tell you, I had a terrible day. It was rough. It was long. It's one of my favorite ones when somebody tells you it's a long day. You know what I say next, right? Yeah. I thought they're all 24 hours. Pretty sure. They're all 24 hours. Except, right, on daylight savings time, right? That's a long day. Because you got to do another hour, right? Yeah, sounds 25. But what makes something a long day versus not a long day? Pretty much what I'm paying attention to. What I'm paying attention to. So we examine this and we start to notice, wow. And it's important that there's a conventional reality. Things do appear and things arise and we need to interact with it in healthy, meaningful ways. But if I start to understand this dreamlike appearance of the world, my experience of the phenomenal world, well, then something very different happens. Every experience I have is an opportunity to gain insight. Every dependent arising that comes my way is an opportunity to recognize the wisdom of how things are, to cultivate merit and wisdom. Every event that arises is an opportunity to be on a path. Things that are happening are not good or bad. Everything that's happening is an opportunity for liberation for yourself and all sentient beings. And that's a very different perspective. And one that's accurate. Much more so than having a bad day. That one doesn't hold up very, very well. But every experience that we have being an opportunity for liberation and cultivating merit and wisdom for all sentient beings, that is there. And it's there if we pay attention to that. So it's very important to start to bring into, in this second point, this is the things that we meditate on, is we start to really notice how things, events, and activities are dependently arisen, and the labels that we attach to them come and go and shift and change. They're not permanent. Nothing's permanent. That's the world that we experience, very subjective. Altar, desk, table, wood, cheap desk, expensive desk. It's always fascinating with, I think we brought that up last week. Yeah, this guy had posted on Facebook. That's where I get all my information. That and Twitter. The difference between a $500 bag and a $20 bag. And functionally, they do the same thing. Yeah. $500 bag, $20 bag. Functionally, they do the same thing. But there can be a huge emotional difference between those two, even though they have the same shape and they serve the same function. And there's a whole elaborative process that's going to place a lot of belief and value on a $500 bag that does the same thing as a $20 bag. And there's going to be a whole lot of suffering in between those two. But we have the opportunity to just see a bag without all that elaboration. And we can actually use the bag to put stuff in and carry things, as opposed to have a bag that we put stuff in and carry things and hope people notice that I have a $500 bag, because that gives me value. People see that and it looks good. Does that really create any joy or happiness? Does that create a lot of suffering? This elaborative process. So this outer world that we start to notice all of this suffering that we create by trying to make this bag that much more valuable than this bag, that human being this much more valuable than that human being, creates a lot of struggle and suffering in our life. It's totally unnecessary. And it doesn't hold up to being true. The second point of, I don't know, maybe it's the third point of the second point. Within the second point, the next line is now going to look inwardly. So outwardly, we notice that the world that we experience is subjective, it's dependently arising. There's nothing permanent, concrete, fixed that's out there. Now inwardly, that which is aware, well, is that existent? Is the awareness itself that's aware, that is aware of the world and John, is that maybe real? Is that inherently existent? And that's where we're at here. So first outwardly, now inwardly. Investigate the nature of unborn awareness. So, any questions before we? We've unpacked this for a couple weeks, so okay. And you online can't ask questions, so hopefully it's clear. Still exploring the ultimate nature of reality, the author turns in the next verse to the objective world, from the objective world to investigation of awareness itself. Reflecting philosophically, it quickly becomes apparent that our bodies are not identical to ourselves. When we seek something to grasp as our personal identity, we naturally arrive at the mind. Not so much the body, but the mind. So what's challenged here is precisely this instinctive sense of personal identity that regards the mind as an entity in its own right. He asks us to investigate whether awareness does in fact exist in its own right, whether our minds exist intrinsically independent of other people's minds, of the environment, and of our bodies. Awareness is a more accurate translation than mind. For Tibetan, the word rikpa is used here. So mind is just this umbrella term that covers a wide variety of mental events, feelings, memories, imaginations, perceptions, etc. So instead of identifying with this abstract mind that seems to stand apart from all these mental functions, let us focus on the more primitive phenomenon of awareness. Simply the sheer presence of consciousness arising moment to moment. Awareness is the event itself, and we can observe it as it arises. Not separate from, but in conjunction with the flavor of each moment. Awareness arising with perception, with imagination, with fear, love, anger, recollection, intelligence, or stupidity. Like I put that in there, or stupidity. So examine the nature of this awareness, keeping in mind that the goal is to determine whether or not awareness exists intrinsically by its own inherent nature. We can ask, first of all, does the awareness we experience exist in the past? Okay. So first, as we get ready to go here, awareness. Awareness is that which is aware. Okay, conscious. So he talks about this primitive, and I like the word subtle, more subtle consciousness. We have a very gross level of mind. It's thinking and all that stuff that's going on. Awareness is stepping back. It's getting out of that stream of mind and thoughts and all that stuff that's going on, worries, fears, stuff going on. With awareness, we kind of get out of that stream. We're on the bank a little bit. We're more mindful. Mindful is this subtle awareness. And you are aware, and you can be aware that you're aware, right? Are you aware that you're aware? Sometimes we're not aware that we're aware, because sometimes we're not even aware. But we're aware that we're not aware when we realize we're not aware, right? It's funny, and all of a sudden I'm aware. But right now you can, one of my little things to tap into awareness is right now, can you be aware? Can you be aware of the space right behind your neck? I bet you can, right? You can be aware of that. Can you be aware of your left toe? Probably be aware of that. If I asked you what you had for breakfast yesterday, you might be aware of that. And if you can't, that's not too uncommon. So awareness is simply the awareness before all the labeling comes up too. But it can be aware of the labeling. So the space behind me, I just bring my awareness there. My toe, bring my awareness there. And this awareness is there before all the labeling that takes place. Something's aware. It's aware of something. I'm aware that it's light in here, I'm aware of a slight noise, this ventilation. So that awareness, Well, is that awareness you? Who's aware? Who's aware? So that's what we're going into. Well, there's this awareness because the awareness is what then gives rise to my experience of the phenomenal world, and then the labeling, and then the feelings, and the thoughts, and I'm very identified with this. So that's where he's at here. Examine the nature of this awareness, keeping in mind that the goal is to determine whether or not awareness exists intrinsically by its own nature. Okay, that's where we're going. First, we can ask, does awareness we experience exist in the past? No, right? Because the past has ceased, right? The past doesn't exist, does it, in this moment? Or does it exist? If you think about it, it's here now, but does it exist? The awareness is only aware in this moment, though, right? So he's saying, okay, so does it exist in the future? No. Because it has not yet arisen. The future hasn't arisen, so there's no awareness of the future yet. The only awareness we experience is in the present, if in fact it truly exists at all. So if awareness does exist, it's right now. We're aware. We can only be aware right now. And now we can ask a very subtle question. Does our experience of awareness in the present, does it have a duration? If our present awareness has no duration at all, we come to a problem. If the present moment of awareness has no duration, then the past also has no duration, being made up only of present moments that are completed, and likewise for the future, which has not yet begun, and so we would have no duration anywhere. People think about this stuff a lot, you know, these yogis. So there's this awareness. Does it have a duration? I mean, or no? And if there's no duration, well, then how did we have any experience of the past? Did that, because the past has a duration, right? And it's made up of a lot of moments. So let's suppose instead that the experimental moment, present awareness, let's say it does have a duration. Yeah, it's easier. We'll say it does have a duration. It is probably very short, right? Awareness, pretty short. It's probably very short, certainly less than a second, because by the end of a second, we can already remember its beginning. For the sake of argument, suppose it lasts 1/100th of a second. Okay? Really quick. They always say that what we're experiencing now is really just the past moment, because we become aware of it. That moment's come, it's gone, a new moment. So, let's say it's 1/100th of a second. Consider the relationship of this present moment of awareness to its parts. If this awareness has duration, then it must have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? If it's got duration, beginning, middle, end. 1/100th of a second can be further divided into thousandths and millionths. The beginning of the present moment cannot be simultaneous with its end, right? The beginning can't be the same as the end. It's got to be different. Or else it would have no duration. So there has to be a duration. If this present moment of awareness identical with its is the present moment of awareness identical with its beginning? If so, it would be contained within the beginning and would also have no duration. Is it identical with the end? For the same reason, it cannot be. Nor is it identical with the middle part, because that would leave out the beginning and the end, so it can't be the same. If the present moment of awareness is not identical with any one of its parts, is it then identical with all of them? Its beginning, middle, and end? This is impossible because there are mutually exclusive sub-moments occurring at different times. No single thing can be identical with other elements that are mutually exclusive. For example, a single piece of fruit cannot be both an apple and an orange. we're going to bring this back to just real quick. Right? So the present moment of awareness also has no material form or location, right? Awareness, does it have a form? Does it have a location? Where's your awareness? There's no physical form to it, and there's no location for it. Right? Can you be aware of your living room right now? Where's your awareness? Yeah, where's the location? Can you be aware of your kindergarten? Where you lived when you were in kindergarten? Maybe, yeah. I can. So where's my awareness? And so it doesn't have a form, and it doesn't have a location. Where is your present moment of awareness of a party you went to when you were a teenager? Where's that? I don't think anybody's aware of a party they went to as a teenager, right? If you were, it wasn't that kind of party. I don't know. And if you're buying, okay, so where's your awareness of a party you went to as a teenager, or of buying your first car? Where's that awareness? Because you can be aware of that, right? Your first car. Mine was a 65 Plymouth Satellite, brown. 383 big block. Never did get that thing to run. But I remember it. Or of making dinner last night. Where's that awareness? Where is your present moment awareness of what you are now seeing visually? To locate this is an artificial designation of a place. That parts of the brain are associated with these mental events is beyond question. So there's a correlation between my awareness and there's something going on in the brain. That's a correlation, that's true. But there's no sound, logical, empirical grounds for equating neurophysiological events with corresponding experiential, non-physical, non-spatial, formless mental events. Yeah, it's a mouthful. Conventionally speaking, the present moment of awareness arises from the preceding moment of awareness. This continuity of awareness is what enables us to remember the past and also to experience the results of our present mental states in the future, whether in this or later lifetimes. But the previous continuum of awareness is not the only cause of the present moment of awareness. Looking at our experience of these moments as they arise, we can see that the awareness is always referential, relating to something. If we ask awareness of what, there's always an answer. Right? What are you aware of? There's always an answer. Awareness of some visual pattern, of sound, of feeling, of recollection, of imagination, of insight, of love, of anger. Awareness exists in an ever-changing causal matrix, modified from moment to moment by internal neurophysiological events, by external physical events, and by other mental events. Each moment of awareness thus exists as dependently related event. It is not a thing, not a real entity existing in its own right, but an event that occurs in dependence upon other events, inner and outer, that are in a continual state of flux. That's a mouthful. But do we start to see that my awareness of this moment, anything to do with it, has to have come from previous moments. And it's always relational. It's always relational to what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing, how I'm feeling. And this awareness that I'm experiencing is dependent upon something to be aware of, a previous moment of awareness that gave rise to it, a body from which, it's dependent upon these what we call these five skandhas. But awareness itself is a continual matrix of things, events actually. It's not a thing. It's an experience that's in a continual flux, a dependent arising. Just like phenomenal events outside, awareness itself is also a dependent arising, dependent upon previous moment of awareness, experience in the past, what it's paying attention to, what it's aware of. It's always referential. There's always something that it's aware of, and it arises in relation to that. So this will mean something here. So, let's see. In the continuum of such mental events, we then discover behavioral, cognitive, and emotional patterns. Out of these patterns, we develop a sense of personality, which we identify as I am. I think, therefore I am. I'm aware, therefore I am. But is that true? But to equate ourselves with these patterns is fallacious. False. It's false. Is that how you pronounce it? Fallacious? False? He uses big words. Every now and then, it's false. To equate me with all these sort of awareness of mental things, that's me, that's I am that. That's false. There is no real personal identity, no I, no self in these ever-changing, dependently related events that can constitute our stream of awareness. In an ultimate sense, the nature of awareness is unborn. That is, in an ultimate sense, not a conventional sense, in an ultimate sense, the nature of awareness is unborn. That is, it does not intrinsically arise from some preceding cause. That there is an awareness that's unborn. Only on a relative or conventional level can we speak of awareness arising and passing again and again. The concept of mind as an abiding, isolated, changeless entity that performs a variety of mental events, choices, memories, imaginations, hopes, fears, that mind as an entity existing in its own right is in fact non-entity. It is purely an artificial fabrication. And by identifying with that false concept of mind, we do ourselves great damage. I keep thinking he's going to get to this easy point where I can just go here. There's one more paragraph, then we'll unpack it. So at this point, the author has discussed both the objective world and the subjective awareness. So, dependently arising, and has concluded that neither exist intrinsically of their own side, intrinsically, independently of everything is a dependent arising. Everything is dependent on causes and parts and subjectives. That's the way things are. Whereas he seemed at first to lead us towards idealism, denying that the objective world has any intrinsic reality, independent of awareness, he then turns around to deny the intrinsic reality of awareness itself. Both the objective world and the subjective world do exist. They do exist. Their ontological status is fundamentally the same. Both exist as matrices of mutually interdependent events. But in neither do we find an absolute foundation of reality. This is neither materialism nor idealism, but something different. How different? We're about to see. Mouthful there. Okay. So, we started with why this is important. Why this is important is because when we make everything real, John can get very upset at Jim or Sam, and then I can get pretty worked up and angry and frustrated and feel less than. I can feel insecure. I can feel worthless. I can feel shame. All that is dependent on how I'm perceiving the world, and it's dependent on John really identified with a particular sense of awareness and feelings and things, as though this same John keeps showing up every day. And is that true? John does not show up the same every day. Even in our own day, you show up with new experiences based on the day before, new awarenesses that arise moment to moment, and you arise in dependence upon who you're with and how they see you. Right? So that's one of those labels I use a lot. When I'm walking here, I'm not John to people on the street. I'm a pedestrian. You know, sometimes I'm what do you call it when you're driving? You're a commuter. Commuter? A motorist. I could be a bike rider. I could be a consumer at the city market. I'm not John there to them. My grandkids don't call me John. I'm trying to train them to say, Grandfather John Bruna. They're not there yet. Grandpa Bruna, we got that part. But I'm a totally different person with them, right? And I'm a totally different person here, right? And then as I go to my family, my brothers, I'm a different person. That label keeps shifting. It's a dependent arising constantly, and you are constantly shifting and changing, a dependent arising, depending on your event, situation, what you're doing, and who you're with, and your mental state at that time, and even how we're perceiving ourselves. I can perceive myself as confident or insecure. But have I changed? And one can go from one to the other pretty quick. Fearful, prideful, like that. Upset, happy, pretty quick. And we've all gone from happy to upset pretty quick too, haven't we? But all those are very transitory. They're all interdependent, and they're all arising dependence upon many things, none of which is a stable you. None of which is a stable you. And that creates all the problems, because I really carry a sense of John, this guy that's like this, who should be treated like so, who likes this and doesn't like that, and who has these preferences and this and that. And I carry that with me every day, and I make it real. And it doesn't really exist that way at all. And I'm changing all the time, and you're changing all the time, and the events that arise are changing all the time. And my suffering is a lot of clinging to things and making them real that have no intrinsic reality. And I'll carry it with me for 10 years. That guy who did that to me 10 years ago, I can still get worked up about that today. Where's the reality of that? Where does that exist? In my mind, grasping onto something as though it was real in a particular way that I'm lugging around, that I wasn't even aware of 10 minutes ago till you brought it up. Why'd you do that? Pissed me off, right? Hey, remember when Jimmy did that? That's sad. And we make it real. So the point that he's bringing is, as we engage, and this is a formal sort of meditation practice, is not sort of, a formal meditation practice, is that at this point of 7-point mind training, we're spending time in meditation kind of noticing how things, outer events are dependent arising, how my awareness of them is a dependent arising. And then he's going to take us to the next one, which then is to bring that awareness into how you engage in the world. And that is pretty awesome. Because then you can start noticing how the labels and things start arise as you're with your kids or friends or someone you don't know, or and how these different labels start thinking, how different people start changing, how I allow people to come and go in different ways. And I can notice how I can have things come and go, and as I stick a label on them, how that gives rise to something without being swept up by it. Which is just living in reality a little more accurately, and not trying to make something real and firm and permanent that doesn't exist that way. But things do exist, and there's things that give rise to suffering and feelings and things. And so it's really to pierce and look at that more accurately. So let's take a moment to dedicate the merit and wisdom that we've accumulated here today and throughout our lives, both individually and collectively. We dedicate this for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be born. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and find lasting happiness. And may we be able to use the merit and the wisdom accumulated here today and throughout our lives to purify our own minds, to recognize our own nature, to become liberated, achieving enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. All right, thank you all so much, and thank you for joining us online. Again, welcome to come to Carbondale for our events as well. It'd be good to have you here. All right, thank you, and be well. Try to stay out of trouble.